Welcome once again to Lehto's Law. Here's Steve Lehto.
Every now and then when I mention odometer tampering or odometer fraud, I get contacted by people who say, Steve, that doesn't happen anymore. Doesn't happen anymore. I've had mechanics tell me that I'm crazy. They go, Steve, modern cars, you can't tamper with the odometers. You're just making stuff up. Or you're just an old guy who doesn't know that you can't tamper with a modern odometer. Okay. So Joel passed the story along to me, and I thank him for that. Article written by Sarah Thompson for WBAY. In this context, I believe WBAY is Bay for Green Bay, Wisconsin. 2 men indicted on charges for odometer tampering scheme. A federal grand jury has indicted 2 men on charges they tampered with odometers on used vehicles and sold them to unsuspecting customers. In a video that's been shown on the channel that I'm talking about, which is Channel 2, Action News, WBAY, their cameras captured U.S. Marshals escorting Robert Solberg and his brother John Solberg into the federal court building in Green Bay this past week. John Solberg was indicted in a separate case for 15 counts of fraud related to his former used car sales business. Robert Solberg was ordered to be held in jail over the holiday weekend. The indictment states that Robert Solberg and Joshua Taylor bought used vehicles and altered or replaced the odometers before selling them to buyers. They allegedly rolled back hundreds of thousands of miles from some of the vehicles before sale. And this is one of those obvious things. If you buy a vehicle that's got 250,000 miles on it, and it's got the odometer that shows all of that, because in the old days it didn't, but a modern odometer, if you can make that 2 turn into a 0, you can vastly increase the perceived value of the vehicle. I say perceived. The news story was broken by Channel 2, which they point out several times, in June. On June 3rd, Green Bay police executed search warrants at Solberg's home, Taylor's home, and a storage facility on Green Bay's east side. Warrants reveal that during searches of 3 properties, police seized 6 vehicles, phones, keys, titles, more than $4,000 in cash, and an odometer cluster, which is a tool used to alter mileage on a vehicle. And I'm not sure if they're misspeaking there because oftentimes the cluster is a reference to the gauges themselves, okay, the instrument cluster. So the odometer tool that they're talking about, I'm not sure what they're talking about, but again, that could just be a slight misspeak. Officers also found multiple odometers. One was in a cardboard box and had been shipped to Solberg. The investigation started in March of this year. An odometer fraud investigator from the Wisconsin Department of Motor Vehicles called Green Bay Police. The DMV needed help with a report of title fraud and odometer tampering. A Brown County man had reported buying a GMC Yukon for $4,100 on Craigslist. He said he made the purchase from a man he did not know, and the handwritten mileage in the title appeared forged from 214,000 miles to 114,000 miles. So the paperwork looked sketchy, and the odometer read the lower mileage but was displaying an error code. He suspected that somebody had tampered with it. Police tracked down the original owner and informed them that he had sold it days earlier at nearly half the price, and that the vehicle had twice as many miles on it when he sold it. So, in fact, the miles had disappeared. The victim's family started searching Craigslist and found more cars from the seller. There were listings around the state. Police found another victim from Green Bay who'd purchased a vehicle that showed 114,000 miles when he learned that the vehicle's real mileage was 300,000. One witness told police that 4 to 5 odometers were being shipped to Solberg's house each week, according to warrants. The documents state that Joshua Taylor bought the odometer tool off eBay for $4,000. Police uncovered a voicemail from an Appleton store that had informed Solberg the odometer cluster he ordered was in stock. If convicted, Solberg and Taylor face up to 5 years in federal prison for conspiracy and up to 3 years in federal prison for tampering. Each count comes with a fine of up to $250,000. And as I've pointed out several times previously on this channel, odometer fraud is a crime and a civil cause of action, meaning that if you roll an odometer back on a vehicle and sell it to somebody and they hire an attorney, quite often they can sue you, depending on what state they're in, under a state law for odometer tampering and possibly a federal law for odometer tampering. And many states have a criminal component, and the Fed does too, as they point out here. So there's a federal statute on it and a state statute on it. People say, well, Steve, why do you need both? Is this overreach by somebody? The statutes are often different, meaning they cover slightly different things. In Michigan, for instance, you can get the damages multiplied if you can prove the person did it intentionally. Some states have doubling of the damages. Some states have trebling of the damages. Some statutes will, have more remedies or they're easier to prove or whatever. And so I can tell you that in the entire time I've been practicing law for just 28 years now, I very rarely hear of prosecutions for this on the criminal side. And you almost only hear of criminal prosecutions when it's a lot of these events happening by one or two people. If it's a criminal enterprise or a ring of people or somebody who's just very, very prolific at it. And I remember back in the old days when I had a radio show and did a talk show every weekend, I remember seeing in one of the big trade magazines for the automotive world that somebody had been busted, and it was a group of people who were being busted for an interstate odometer tampering ring. Now, the weird part about this is it is much easier to get caught than it used to be. Because in the old days with mechanical odometers, the actual dials, the little wheels that spun with the numbers on them, somebody could take one of those things apart, change the numbers, put it back together again. It's very, very difficult to detect if it was done properly. Now, nowadays, there's two problems. One is that many of these things are digital odometers, and there's an actual box someplace, a black box, figuratively speaking, inside the vehicle that stores the information and simply transmits the information to what appears on the dashboard. I understand that that can also be hacked and changed and so on, but quite often it's difficult to do. And quite often it does leave traces that something happened, like an error code or some kind of mismatch someplace. But the other thing is simply that the title histories of these things get recorded by the states. And in the old days, you could order a title history, and you still can, by the way. In the state of Michigan, for instance, you can do a thing called a title lookup, one word, title lookup, title one word, lookup another word, and get a title history in any vehicle that you own. And if the car has been in the state of Michigan its entire life, you'll get every single title back the certificate of origin. And you can look at the mileage climb, and it should be climbing in a straight line. It should not ever drop and go backwards. And so that's something that, that used to be what I call trap for the stupid. Obviously, if you were the original owner of the vehicle and rolled the miles back before you sold it, that might not show up. But nowadays, a lot of these things are showing up on Carfax and the equivalent. Any of the title services that track histories through titles and auto repairs and oil changes will often reveal these kinds of things also. So this is one of the dumbest things to be doing on a big scale, to be doing odometer fraud, because if you get caught, it's so easy to prove that you did it, and the penalties can be severe, like they said here. Fines of up to $250,000. It's $250,000 fine, and that's along with the jail time. So that's not something you want to do as a hobby. But nowadays, I've also seen. I'm just going to throw this in there as a side note. I've also seen people tell me that they said they bought a car, and the Carfax revealed some kind of problem with the odometer, and it was clear that somebody had fat-fingered a number. You go to an oil change place, 89,000 miles, and the guy accidentally typed in 69,000 miles. And, he just made a mistake. And so sometimes those things can be fixed, sometimes they can't, and sometimes they pop up at a time that causes so much problems that so many problems that if you do fix it, it's still a problem. So that's the thing. But here we go. 2 guys indicted on charges for odometer tampering. There might be 3 men involved. I'll follow the story as it progresses. But like I said, they're accused of doing this with a bunch of cars, and that is usually where you see the problems, where the actual law enforcement gets involved. But I can tell you I've handled probably a dozen cases in my career, maybe 2 dozen cases, involving odometer fraud, where somebody calls me and says, Steve, I can prove to you with documents in 30 seconds I just bought a vehicle, and the guy I bought it from is the guy who rolled the odometer back. And they put all the documents on my desk, and they go, you're right, let's sue him. And we sue him. And I can tell you, again, that's also the problem is people often commit crimes they can't pay for because they don't have pockets deep enough. When you're done with them, I've gotten judgments against guys, and I can tell you, for instance, I put a guy into bankruptcy. And the funny thing is that odometer fraud's an intentional act. You can't discharge it in bankruptcy. So he went into bankruptcy, and my client was one of the few people who actually got paid out of his money. So, and I know people out there say, Steve, I can't believe you do things like that to people. The guy was rolling odometers back. It's not my fault. Don't blame me. Meanwhile, meth, we were on it. In case you're curious, you're wondering, wait, I saw Steve wear a meth we're on it shirt the other day. In fact, I saw him wear a couple other days. And if you pay very close attention, you'll notice that one was black, one was green, this one's blue. And yes, so far I've gotten 5. So for those of you who've sent me meth, we're on it shirts, thank you very much. Please correspond with me and let me know that it was you and so on. But if you're inclined to send me one after seeing the video where I pleaded for one, you don't need to anymore. 5 is more than enough. Meth, we're on it. Questions or comments, put them below. Let's talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching Lehto's Law. And no, I'm not a robot.